Since with the Jean Carroll court case, Trump, his yabba dabba doo lawyer, crime is in the news. So I thought, what better moment to revisit when Jim Jordan decided to have one of his crime hearings. He had a field trip to New York and thought he would be able to, make capital gain leverage with Alvin Bragg. It went as well as you would expect it to be. Just another disaster for one of Trump's brown-nosing sycophants. Cue Adam Schiff and co.
Let me be very clear. We are here today in Lower Manhattan for one reason and one reason only. The chairman is doing the bidding of Donald Trump. Committee Republicans designed this hearing to intimidate and deter the duly elected district attorney of Manhattan from doing the work his constituents elected him to do. They have demanded access to the inner workings of an ongoing criminal case, information to which they know they are not entitled. They have subpoenaed a witness who used to work for the district attorney, whom they know cannot answer their questions, and they have earned a lawsuit that risks future congressional oversight as a result. They have perpetuated the anti-Semitic and racist tropes that Mr. Trump has directed at both the prosecutor and the judge in this case. They are using their public offices and the resources of this committee to protect their political patron, Donald Trump. It is an outrageous abuse of power. It is, to use the chairman's favorite term, a weaponization of the House Judiciary Committee. I do not know if Mr. Trump will be found guilty.
Gentlemen, suspend. The gallery should refrain from commenting and let the gentleman from New York finish his statement. Gentleman is recognized.
I do not know if Mr. Trump will be found guilty by a jury of his peers here in New York, or for that matter in Georgia or in Washington, D.C. on charges that may follow, but I do know that he will have his day in court. Using this committee to undermine that process as it unfolds is cynical, unethical, and given the violence unleashed on the Capitol by the former president, just plain dangerous. Now, we all grieve for the victims of violent crime, here in Manhattan and everywhere. But it is shameful that the Republicans of this committee would use the pretext of violent crime as an excuse to play tourist in New York and bully the district attorney. And it is particularly disgraceful that they would use this pretext after doing nothing to stop the gun violence that terrorizes our nation. According to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been at least 146 mass shootings this year alone. That means there have been more mass shootings than days so far this year. 3 people were shot dead and 5 others injured at Michigan State University. 3 children and 3 teachers were shot and killed at a private school in Nashville, Tennessee. 5 people are dead and 8 others, including 2 police officers, are injured after a mass shooting at a bank in Louisville, Kentucky. These tragedies have taken place in nearly every corner of our nation, although I note in the study by Everytown that in states where elected officials have taken action to pass gun safety laws, dramatically fewer people die by gun violence. And although there has not, thank God, been a recent mass shooting here in Manhattan, we must do more to stem the iron pipeline, the illicit flow of illegal firearms from states that do less to protect their citizens to New York and elsewhere. Unlike our Republican colleagues, Democrats have consistently advanced policies that make all of our communities, including New York, safer places to live, to work, to worship, and to go to school. Last Congress, over the objection of every Republican here today, we passed the first gun violence prevention package in decades. We can and must do more. We must pass universal background checks. We must implement red flag laws to keep guns away from those who are a danger to themselves and others. And we must reinstate the assault weapons ban. Each of these proposals are overwhelmingly popular with the American public, and each is opposed by House Republicans. We also advanced the Victim Act to provide funding to law enforcement to improve murder clearance rates. If my Republican colleagues were serious about violent crime and sincere in their efforts for law enforcement, they would have joined us in that effort. But 178 Republicans opposed that measure last Congress on the House floor. We supported legislation to improve policing through additional funding, better training, and accountability to strengthen public trust, because we know that public safety requires law enforcement agencies and their community partners working together. Again, every Republican on the committee stood opposed. Here in New York, one of the largest and most complex cities in the world, local leaders have pursued violence intervention, diversion programs, targeted law enforcement, and youth engagement programs that have pushed crime and incarceration to the lowest levels in decades. Over the past year, under the leadership of Mayor Adams and District Attorney Bragg, crime in Manhattan has dropped in nearly every major category, including murders down 14%, shootings down 17%, burglaries down 21%, and robberies down 8%, all in 1 year. And compare that to Mr. Jordan's Ohio, where the homicide rate is 73% higher than in Manhattan. And on the specific topic of gun violence, the district attorney is to be commended for securing indictments against gun traffickers, ghost gun manufacturers, and other violent criminals, leading to a full 20% reduction in shootings last year. The chairman says this hearing is about violent crime in Manhattan, but New York remains one of the safest big cities in America. I'm sure my colleagues have talking points and anecdotes to the contrary, but the evidence is firmly on our side. And the evidence shows, unfortunately, that the chairman could have held this hearing back in Washington or in Ohio or in any other jurisdiction where the numbers are trending in the wrong direction. But instead, he rushed to hold a hearing here in Manhattan in defense of Donald Trump. I understand that in the days leading up to this hearing, Republican members were instructed not to speak about Mr. Trump during these proceedings. Don't take the bait, they were warned, as if we cannot draw a straight line from the chairman's attacks on the district attorney in the wake of the indictment to his attacks on the district attorney here today. We know better. We all know better. The New Yorkers gathered outside of this building certainly know better. You can pretend that you aren't here on Donald Trump's behalf, but you cannot stop the New York criminal justice system from running its course, and you will not intimidate New Yorkers with your brief visit to this city. I thank the chairman, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his statement. And now, without objection, committee will be in order. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Almost 3 weeks ago, is the microphone on?
Yeah, just pull it close.
Almost 3 weeks ago, Donald J. Trump was indicted by a grand jury in Manhattan on dozens of counts of fraud in connection with a hush money payment scheme in which his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, previously went to jail. Since the former president's indictment, the Manhattan district attorney has been the subject of countless death threats and racist diatribes. Others have made ugly appeals to anti-Semitism in an effort to attack the proceedings. And this committee has used every means at its disposal to disrupt, interrupt, and interfere with the prosecution, demanding documents it has no right to obtain and no jurisdiction to demand, subpoenaing a former district attorney, deputy district attorney, and threatening to subpoena the DA himself, and now holding this hearing in Manhattan in a vain attempt to intimidate or embarrass the prosecutorial authority. Now, the majority denies that this is the purpose of today's hearing. They would have you believe it is a mere coincidence that all of a sudden and out of the blue, the chairman decided that the state of New York is a wonderful place to do a hearing. Not the chairman's home state of Ohio with its high rates of murder, but New York State. And of all the cities in New York, they would pick New York City. And of all the boroughs in New York, they pick Manhattan. Apparently, Manhattan is just lovely this time of year. What a remarkable coincidence, we are meant to believe. Of all the gin joints and all the towns in all the world, we just happened to walk into this one. How absurd. Of course, this is not a coincidence at all. Instead, it is the GOP leadership in Congress doing what it has done best for the last 6 years, and that is to act as the criminal defense counsel for Donald J. Trump. Well, let me tell you this.
Capitol Police. Gentlemen will suspend. Capitol Police. Capitol Police will remove the gentleman from the audience.
Let me tell you this. Let me tell you this.
Gentlemen.
Let me tell you this. Let me tell you this. Donald J. Trump.
Gentlemen, we'll suspend until we got order. Gentlemen, will suspend. The audience has to be in order. Capitol Police. Capitol Police. Sir.
Can we have order?
We are working on it, Mr. Schiff. Gentlemen, Capitol Police, please remove the gentleman from the audience. No, you got to go. You got to go. I'm sorry. I've given you several warnings. You got to go, unfortunately.
He's from my district.
It was a very unfortunate attack on Ralph Nader.
Committee will be in order. Committee will be in order. The gentleman from California.
Those comments about Ralph Nader are way out of line. Of course, it is not a coincidence that we are here in Manhattan. Instead, it is the GOP leadership in Congress doing what it has done best over the last 6 years, and that is to act as the criminal defense counsel for Donald J. Trump. Well, let me tell you this. Donald Trump doesn't need the lawyers on this committee to be his criminal defense lawyer. He has plenty of those already. Nor is that the role of Congress. Quite the opposite. Our role should be to defend the rule of law, not tear it down. We should be defending the principle that no one is above the law, not attempting to establish a new principle that if you are politically powerful enough, you get a pass. We should be defending the independence of the grand jury and the safety of a public servant enforcing the law, not adding to the dangers to both. The Manhattan District Attorney has the burden of proving Donald Trump guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. A jury of ordinary citizens will have the responsibility of determining whether he has met that burden. That this process will be the same for a former president as it would be for his lawyer or his driver or his doorman or his neighbor is the strength of a democracy, not its weakness. The first thing Chairman Jordan said today was that this hearing is about the administration of justice, but more accurately, it is about an effort to interfere with the administration of justice. He said that here in Manhattan, the scales of justice are being weighed down by politics, and they are, but only today. And by this committee's actions in trying to intimidate the Manhattan DA for having the audacity to believe that in America, being rich, being powerful, even being president of the United States does not entitle you to violate the law with impunity. There was a time in America when both parties used to believe in the rule of law, but sadly those days are over. One of America's two great political parties believes that political might makes right, and more than right, it means that you are beyond the reach of the law and beyond accountability. The more power, the less justice. But this is not democracy. This is the antithesis of democracy. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all of our witnesses being here today. Thank you for sharing your compelling stories. I would just say, Mr. Morgan, after hearing what you've heard today, I think you probably understand why it's real tough to sit down and have a logical, cogent argument on how we might jointly, with nonpartisan affiliation, try to solve some of these problems. What do you think?
And talks about you guys, Republicans, about Trump. Hey, while Trump was in office, he's busy holding hearings trying to get him out for 4 years. So I don't think you have the right to say that you politicized when you were in power. You tried to get Trump out, you couldn't get him out. Let's face reality, you tried. The dossier was a fake, everything what it was. You tried to get him. He's sitting there laughing. That's very nice. And the other Democrats are telling us that we're all props for sitting there. Please don't talk down to us. It's really not nice.
Thanks, Mr. Borg.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to just read some. These are not by a Republican. These aren't from Republican members of this committee. These are just comments here. This is what an individual said. I would add that, it's not so much from necessarily federal funding, but it's something that I do want to spend more time on and focus on, and use the pulpit representing the district in public safety. I think a lot of people walk around the city very scared right now, and the violent crime wave is very concerning. This individual also said, I think people are scared to go on the subway in the whole district. I've heard it from all over the place, from the wealthy areas in Tribeca, to Chinatown, to Borough Park, to Sunset Park. I think a lot of people are afraid. He also said, I'm very concerned about the safety in the city. He also said, I've been part of this community defending the victims and trying to protect the public for my whole career, and I think that those experiences resonate with people in different ways for different reasons, close quote. We cannot allow people to just continue to cycle through the system because it's demoralizing to the cops and it gives everyone a perception of danger. He also said, whether or not the data says that it's safe or not, there is a perception in the city that it is not safe, and one of the reasons for that is the perpetual recidivism that is going on, close quote. He also said, quote, you've got people randomly being shot on the subways. You've got people randomly being thrown into car trunks and driven to remote places and shot. There's an insecurity not felt in 25 years. It's scary to me and far away the number one issue, close quote. That didn't come from anybody on this side of the aisle. It didn't even come from any of you at the table. It came from Mr. Goldman over there. We sit in his district. He knows that there's a crime problem. And we've been hearing about a study. Let me refer you to the heritage study that my colleague referred to, and I ask that it's mission.
Without objection.
Thank you. Quote, when you remove the crime-infested, homicide-riddled cities from the state murder rate featured in the Third Way study, which was co-authored by Mr. Kessler, you dramatically lower the murder rate for that state, upending their conclusions, his conclusions, and exposing the piece for what it really is, a straightforward attempt at political projection dressed up as a study. That's what you've been hearing about to rebut the stories and the facts of the lives of the victims and the witnesses and those who live in this city today. Mr. Holden, why won't your family take the subway, the mass transit system in this city?
What they've experienced when my daughter took the subway.
Ms. Graham, you failed to note that as a result of D.A. Bragg's prosecution, 2 men are currently serving life sentences for the murder of your son. Mr. Kessler, in your testimony, you noted that New York City is safer than most cities and even most states in America. The police department's own data show that since D.A. Bragg took office, shootings in Manhattan have declined by 20%, homicides have declined by 16%, and the rates of virtually every other type of violent crime are lower during the first quarter of this year than they were at this time last year. In the meantime, homicide rates in places such as Ohio, Louisiana, Texas, and Arizona are much higher than in New York. As someone who studies crime trends, what do you think accounts for this disparity in safety between Manhattan and other parts of the United States?
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. So I don't think any place in this country is really safe, okay, because we're awash in guns. New York is safer, and it's, on average, New York City is safer than Ohio, Texas, many other places. I think number one is gun ownership rates, okay? So gun ownership rates in red states tend to be about twice the gun ownership rates in blue states. There are other factors as well. Poverty rates matter. Educational attainment is often a correlation with crime. And I also think that in certain states, cities in those states are starved for resources because, frankly, the governors don't really care about getting votes in those states. And so I think some of the urban areas in southern states, the amount of police that they have per capita is far less than in places like New York City, and all the resources for schools and after-school programs. But I think number one is gun ownership rates.
Thank you. How does New York City's murder rate compare to the national average?
New York City's murder rate is 18% below the national average, and I believe has been below the national average every single year since 2010, and I think several years before that, between 2000 and 2010.
How about assault?
The assault rates are lower.
And burglary?
Burglary rates are lower.
Larceny?
Lower.
And rape?
Lower.
And how do the incidence of those crimes in New York City compare to the national average?
In all of those cases, New York City's rates are lower.
How does New York City's murder rate compare to that of Ohio?
New York City's murder rate in 2020, I should say Ohio's murder rate in 2020 was 59% higher than New York City's.
And what about the rate of rape in Ohio compared to New York?
The rate of rape in Ohio was 280% higher.
Than in New York. And assault?
34% higher.
And burglary?
146% higher.
And larceny?
346% higher.
Than in New York.
Than
How
in
do
New
the
York City.
incidence rates of those crimes in New York City compare to the national averages?
Okay. New York City's murder rate is 18% below the national average. Rate of rape 58% lower. Rate of robbery is 102% higher. Rate of assault 16% lower. Rate of burglary 44% lower. Rate of larceny 71% lower. Rate of motor theft 58% lower. So lower on 6 out of the 7.
Now, let's talk specifically about violent crime. Based on your review of crime data, does New York have a higher or lower rate of violent crime than Florida?
Lower.
And what about Louisiana?
Lower.
Kentucky?
Lower.
Arizona?
Lower.
North Carolina?
Lower.
If you were able to decide or given a choice of where to hold a hearing about violent crime in America, what are some of the cities or states where you think a hearing would be most needed and most effective, and why?
Well, I think you could certainly hold hearings in places like, Louisville, very high rates. Jacksonville, very high crime rates there. There's a lot of Alabama, Mississippi, extraordinarily high murder rates in those states. Some in cities, some not in cities. New York City is, look, there's a lot of bad stuff that happens in the city because there's 8.5 million people here. But relative to the rest of the country, it's doing better.
And finally, according to CDC data, the states with the highest rates of gun deaths are Mississippi, Louisiana, Wyoming, Missouri, Alabama, and Alaska. What trends are you seeing with respect to gun violence generally in red states?
What we found when we looked at between 2000 and 2020 is the murder rate in red states, as defined by the 25 states that voted for Donald Trump in 2020 versus the 25 states that voted for Joe Biden, the murder rate in red states was higher than the murder rate in blue states in all 21 of those years.
Hearing about Donald Trump from one side and not the other. But I want to tell you that that's very, very intentional, because they know that they are using taxpayer money to defend a private citizen in his own criminal investigation, and that is an abuse of their power. The day before this investigation began, public reporting revealed that Donald Trump and his legal team directed House Republicans to initiate an investigation into Alvin Bragg. And they're now scrambling to justify this investigation with after-the-fact explanations, including the preposterous explanation that he spent $5,000 of federal money on this years-long investigation. They have spent many multiples of that amount of money on this hearing alone in order to hold it in Manhattan. Now, I've asked the chairman and other members of House leadership to tell the American public what kind of collusion they have been doing with Donald Trump to use the power of this committee and of this Congress to interfere in this prosecution. They have thus far refused. But we will learn about that collusion, because the Manhattan District Attorney has a lawsuit against the chairman, and they will be able to compel disclosure of the communication and coordination as part of that lawsuit. But that's why we are here, and that's what we want to emphasize to you. And we're not insulting you. Your experiences are devastating. But the problem is that this is a charade to cover up for an abuse of power, that they are going around talking incessantly outside of this hearing about Donald Trump. And the purpose of this hearing is to cover up for what they know to be an inappropriate investigation. Now, I look forward, many of you are
Can I
in New York
respond to you,
City.
please?
No, not right now, because I only have 20 seconds, I'm sorry. But I do want to
Don't
talk.
insult my intelligence. That you're not.
Hang on. The gentleman's time.
I'm not
time
insulting
is
your
up.
You're trying to insult me
Time.
like I'm not aware of
Ms.
what's going
Ms.
on
Brame,
here.
Thank you.
Okay?
The time
I'm
belongs to
fully aware of what's going on here.
Gentlemen, they will suspend. Gentleman gets another 15 seconds.
Thank you.
That's why I walked away from the plantation of the Democratic Party.
Committee will be in order.
Ms. Brame, what I was about to say is that as a representative of this city, I look forward to working with you, with Ms. Harrison, Mr. Holden, Mr. Borgen, all of you who are involved and engaged in our criminal justice system. Because, as I said, and my colleagues have referenced,
Gentleman's time
we
has
do
expired.
have a problem, not
Gentleman's
only
time-
in New York City, but around the country.
Gentleman's
So
time has
hopefully
expired.
we can
Gentleman
work
yields
together
back.
to reach real solutions, not charades like this. And I yield
Gentlelady
back.
from New York, Ms. Stefanik, is recognized for 5 minutes.
As a native New Yorker, born and bred, I think it's important to note that many of the Democrats on this committee have smeared brave victims and fellow New Yorkers here today, calling them props, a circus, a performance, MAGA Broadway pops, and an underlying sham. What have Republicans focused on? We've focused on giving victims a voice. We've focused on crimes. We've focused on your story as a father, visiting your son at the hospital, seeing his face beaten in with an anti-Semitic hate crime. We're focused, Ms. Brame, on your story as a mother, grieving the loss, rightfully grieving the loss, and advocating on behalf of your son and his legacy. Ms. Harrison, we heard your story about losing your loved one. And Mr. Alba, we heard your story, just the personal challenges you've faced dealing with the consequences of the vicious crime perpetrated against you. And in addition to House Democrats belittling the victims here today, Democrats have politicized this hearing, mentioning Donald Trump 38 times. That number for Republicans is 0. We are focused on victims and making sure that we support law and order in this country. There is a catastrophic crime crisis across America, specifically in our great cities and great cities like New York. New Yorkers know it, Americans know it. And while Democrats on this committee may claim that New York is not the epicenter, look no further than the last November election where we flipped 4 congressional seats, delivering the House majority. What was the number one issue? It was crime, because voters are smart. The people are smart. Mr. DiGiacomo, as a longtime member of law enforcement, I wanted to get your testimony today. How long have you served in law enforcement?
Approximately 40 years.
And in those 40 years, would you say the crime crisis today is worse than you've ever seen it?
That's correct.
Crime is up. Is it fair to say that it is a result of failed bail reform policies in Albany and Alvin Bragg's Day 1 memo?
100%.
And here are some important numbers. In 2022, District Attorney Bragg's first year as DA, New York City saw a 23% surge in major crimes. Is that true?
That's correct.
From 2019 to 2022, murders are up 93%.
That's correct.
From 2019 to 2022, robberies are up 43%.
Correct.
Felony assaults are up 32%.
Correct.
And it's fair to say that law enforcement strongly opposed Bragg's Day 1 memo and failed bail reform policies in Albany.
100%.
Mr. DiGiacomo, in fact, you have said, quote, Bragg gives criminals the roadmap to freedom from prosecution and control of our streets. In Bragg's Manhattan, you can arrest, deal drugs, obstruct arrest, and even carry a gun to get away with it. Can you please expound about why law enforcement opposes Alvin Bragg's Day 1 policy and opposes failed bail reform?
Well, because, again, every time a detective or a police officer puts himself or herself in harm's way, arresting a felon or anyone for any crime, they're released immediately with no consequences.
Mr. Borgen, as a family member of a victim of a heinous violent crime, your son, as you talked about, was a victim of a violent anti-Semitic hate crime committed at a pro-Israel event. Your son was jumped, beaten, and sprayed with mace. In fact, and I think it's important for the American people and my colleagues across the aisle to hear this, your son describes this as, a whole crowd of people proceeded to kick me, punch me, beat me down. I felt a liquid being poured on my face, and at first I thought I was getting urinated on, but it turned out I was getting maced and pepper sprayed. My face was on fire. That pain was worse than the concussion and all this other stuff that followed. And yet the attacker said, if I could do it again, I would do it again. And yet, District Attorney Alvin Bragg gave him a sweetheart deal. What is your message to District Attorney Alvin Bragg?
Well, the man is incompetent, obviously, in the big scheme of things. But unfortunately, you know, our hands are tied. He can come to us. Said he offered him other deals. My son did not accept them. Right now, the court case is pending, and different deals are passing on from back and forth. But you know, between me and you, I lost faith in the justice system with Alvin Bragg. I don't feel anything's going to get done. Like in the other cases, also, her son's attackers walking around scot-free like nothing happened. It's a disgrace. And I just want to say to you, Mr. Ivey, I compliment you. You're the only one who sat here on the Democratic side, didn't bring up Donald Trump. And you're a mensch. You talk straight. You didn't look to make partisan politics here. I want to compliment you.
Ms. Harrison, what's your message to Alvin Bragg?
I'm a walking example of not ever being whole 18 years after losing a loved one under horrific circumstances and not seeing justice. My life will never, ever be complete without Kevin, and knowing that the murderers' families are walking free, spending Christmases and Easters with their family is it's beyond comprehension. So I hope that he will pay attention to what's happening here today and realize the effect that he's having on survivors of homicide victims for the rest of their lives.
Thank you to the victims for the bravery sharing your stories. Thank you to our former law enforcement officers for your leadership. Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back just to the witnesses. Now we'll just be on this side. I think the Democrats have all went. It's about 40 more minutes. If you got to step out, just please let us know. But we want every member to get a chance to talk to you. If you need to step out, please just excuse yourself. And Capitol Police, make sure you know where you're going out there. With that, I yield to the gentleman from 5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the chairman. Much has been made about why we are in New York City. In a memorable moment shortly before he was elected, former Mayor Rudolph Giuliani told an editorial board meeting he cared about statistics, but the real measure would be whether people actually feel safer. That, he said, was the ultimate test of policing and political leadership. He said that in 1993 when New York was averaging 2,000 murders a year. By 2013, it was down to 333 due to the strong support of law enforcement and the anti-crime policies adopted by the city. Got down to 288 by 2018, but now it is back up to the mid-400s. I think this is the question, is whether or not you feel safe. And the question I'd ask of Ms. Brame, Ms. Harrison, others, do you feel safe in New York City right now?
No.
Yeah. Mr. Alba, do you feel safe in New York City? Right. And Mr. Giacomo, your history in law enforcement, you said it's as unsafe as you've ever seen it today in New York.
Yes, that's correct.
And isn't that the ultimate measure? Isn't that the question? And I think one of the things that I think merits focusing on is the question that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been talking about in terms of jurisdiction. What is the jurisdiction here? Mr. Giacomo, are you familiar with 922G and 924C in the federal code?
No, I'm not. I'm sorry.
922G being felons in possession, 924C being the ability to be able to go after somebody and give it a heightened sentencing for their use of firearms and crimes. And my question here, we might suspend.
The committee will suspend. The gentleman is recognized to continue.
All right, so we're back on. 922G and 924C, these are federal crimes, right? And they're federal crimes that we have programs like Project Safe Neighborhoods that work with local law enforcement, where we have the United States Attorney's Office in coordination to try to combat crime and the use of firearms in crimes. Now, I suppose we could go through and look at the laundry list of legislation that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have introduced to repeal said federal laws, that these federal laws should not exist. Now, we want to have a debate about federalism about that. Happy to have it. But we're not doing that, are we? Because that's not what this is about. It's about show. The fact is we do have federal laws on the books to go after criminal misuse of firearms, but they're not being enforced. And they're also not being enforced at the local level. Those are the facts. And the facts are we're letting criminals out of jail. If you look at the data is clear. The average criminal has 11 prior arrests, 5 criminal convictions. 77% have
We
5
need the
plus
crowd to be quiet, please. Thank you.
5 plus prior arrests. 74% have prior violent arrests. 30% have prior arrests for guns and weapon offenses. Even though these individuals have lengthy criminal records, 52% served a year or less. 60% are rearrested within 2 years of release. The fact is, we have a recidivism problem, and we have now gone down the road of decarceration. Hundreds of thousands of criminals have been released. Just since 2020, the incarcerated population is down about 300,000. When it was 2.1 million, which, by the way, was pretty far down from the levels when we had the safest numbers and the safest streets in the city. But this isn't about some libertarian worldview of letting out a few potheads who are allegedly rotting in jail. 88% of prisoners are incarcerated in the state systems for murder, rape, robbery, and assault. It's responsible for most of those sentences. A mere 14% are in custody primarily for narcotics offenses, and the vast majority of these are felony trafficking crimes and misdemeanor possession. My question is for you, Mr. Giacomo, is do you think that we have a problem with the gun issue, or do you think we have a problem with letting criminals out on the streets?
Well, the criminals are being let out at an alarming rate. And I just want to make it clear here that the guns, I'm speaking for New York City, the guns that are being used here in New York City are illegal guns. Yeah. They're illegal guns that are brought here into New York City and being used to victimize the people.
And are they being prosecuted heavily by the DA here?
No, they're not.
Right. And isn't that the problem?
That is a major problem.
And are they being prosecuted in coordination with the United States Attorney's Office using 922G and 924C to prosecute it?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Right. And isn't that fundamentally the problem?
Correct.
Question I have, my colleagues on the side of the aisle mentioned former President Trump a number of times. I would just ask, was it former President Trump, Ms. Brame, that killed your son?
No.
Ms. Harrison, was it former President Trump that killed your loved ones?
No.
Was it former President Trump that stabbed Mr. Alba? Was it former President Trump that prosecuted Mr. Alba and prosecuted him for defending himself? No. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the representative from Texas, Mr. Niels.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Mr. Chairman, this is a sham hearing. It's not about crime in New York. It's an effort to impede and ultimately suppress the prosecution of Donald Trump. And if you don't believe it, then all you need to do is connect the dots. First, Manhattan District Attorney Bragg announced his criminal charges against ex-President Trump. Then, House Judiciary Republicans abused their power by subpoenaing testimony and records from D.A. Bragg about the ongoing prosecution. And next, they bring this sham hearing to Manhattan, supposedly about crime. But if my colleagues across the aisle were really concerned and really cared about reducing violent crime, they'd work with Democrats to pass common sense gun laws. There are too many gun deaths in this country, and that's why I have joined with my fellow Democrats to co-sponsor bills that would ban assault weapons, strengthen background checks, and fund research into gun violence prevention. Meanwhile, MAGA Republicans continue to resist even the most basic reforms like universal background checks. If Republicans really wanted to stop violent crime, they would be in D.C. right now, working with Democrats to pass common sense gun legislation. Instead, like jackbooted thugs, they've descended on New York City using violent crime as their pretext. The MAGA Republican extremists are not interested in gun violence or even knife violence. The Republican witnesses who have used their time to criticize District Attorney Bragg have served as props in a MAGA Broadway production. The real purpose in coming to New York City,
Can we have order?
the real purpose in coming to New York City.
Gentlemen, we'll suspend.
Stop the clock.
Gentlemen, let's suspend. For the audience, I've said several times now that the committee has to be in order. If anyone continues, then we're going to have to escort some people out.
Please don't talk please don't talk down to us witnesses, please.
Yep. The gentleman from Georgia controls the time. Mr. Johnson, you can proceed.
The real purpose in coming to New York City is to harass, intimidate, and threaten Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. We are here because Manhattan District Attorney Bragg announced the indictment of former President Trump, and MAGA United States House Republicans have responded by using their power to try to help ex-President Trump beat the 34 counts of fraud that he has been charged with. MAGA Republican extremists have defended the January 6th insurrectionists, and they are out here today serving as Trump's bulldogs, trying to scare a duly elected district attorney from following the facts where they lead and enforcing the law. It is just one more sign that MAGA Republicans are a clear and present danger to our democracy and are actively working to undermine the rule of law, not just federally, but also on the state and local levels. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from New York's 18th District, the Honorable Congressman Adriano Espaillat.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you, my colleague Hank Johnson, for yielding time. Mr. Chairman, first I want to express my condolences, my deepest condolences to both Ms. Harrison and Ms. Brain. And Mr. Alba, I was proud to see your community, our community, rally around you and other bodegueros, and I applauded D.A. Bragg's decision to drop the charges against you. During the 80s and 90s, before I was involved in public service, as a regular citizen of New York, I fought crime and drugs during the crack wars in northern Manhattan. During those years, the 34th precinct used to average over 100 homicides. Let me repeat this: over 100 homicides a year. Myself and my family members were held at gunpoint during those years. Held up at gunpoint. I don't know if any of you here have been held up at gunpoint. This is deeply personal to me. This year, the 34th precinct has witnessed 0 homicides. And last year, although far too many, that same precinct in northern Manhattan witnessed 5 homicides. From 100 to 5, and to this year, 0. But let me say something to you, Mr. Chairman. The common denominator in most homicides across the country is a gun. It's a gun. 80% of the homicides in this country are committed by guns. A young man murdered on 137th Street. A gun.
The gentleman from Georgia
and
yields
you
back.
guys brandish your paints with AR-15. Reprehensible.
The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by quoting a short excerpt from an important study and legal memorandum that was issued in November by the Heritage Foundation. Listen to this. It's entitled, "The Blue City Murder Problem." And this summary statement is a message to all Americans.
Gentlemen, suspend for just a second. I would ask that the audience be quiet. The gentleman from Louisiana controls the time. If we could stop. But the press would please move so we can conduct a hearing. We move aside. Capitol Police, if you could help us just clear that out. The press will be given ample opportunity to talk to folks. We need to clear out and be quiet during the hearing. Committee will be in order. Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Here's the quote. "Your public safety as a resident is dramatically impacted by your district attorney and whether he or she is a George Soros-funded rogue prosecutor or a law and order prosecutor, by your police department
and by whether the local politicians support and adequately fund the police and prosecutors' offices. It goes on. This is why the Soros rogue prosecutor movement has concentrated its fire at identifying, recruiting, and funding candidates for local district attorney races. By elevating pro-criminal and anti-victim zealots into office, the rogue prosecutor movement destabilizes the safety of our communities, treats criminals as victims and police as the criminals, and ignores real victims. America's sky-high murder rates, for example, are almost exclusively cabined in cities run by Democrats and with Democrat district attorneys, many of whom are bought and paid for by George Soros. Why are we beginning our crime wave field hearings in New York City? Because this is one of the most egregious examples in America. Alvin Bragg is the poster child for exactly what was just described. Ms. Brame, I want to thank you for your compelling testimony today and sharing the shocking and tragic story of your son, Sergeant Hassan Korea's gang assault and vicious murder by 4 criminals he did not know. In your written statement submitted today, you wrote this. You said, quote, D.A. Bragg has demonstrated over and over again that he has no regard or concern for human life or victims of crime by instituting his ADAs to not prosecute violent recidivists and ultimately release them back to the streets to victimize and terrorize more innocent New Yorkers, unquote. You heard Mr. Nadler and Mr. Kessler and others share their manipulated statistics this morning, suggesting that New York City is, quote, one of the safest big cities in America. But you and other New Yorkers don't agree with that, I know. Mr. Holden just said our people are afraid to go anywhere because this is the worst lawlessness in the city's history. How do you respond to these claims that this is just a magical, safe city right now?
Well, you know, I think that the average New Yorker doesn't care nothing about no statistics, okay? Especially in the black and brown communities. We care about the mothers who have to visit the morgue to identify their dead child's body. We care about the mothers who have to lean into the coffin and watch them lower that top down on that child and they know they'll never see them again. We care about being able to let our child go out to the park and play without getting shot in their stroller. We care about not getting raped in elevators. We don't care nothing about your statistics. You cannot convince us to not believe our lying eyes with your numbers, all right? Because we see it with our very eyes, day in and day out, especially in the poor black and brown communities, where none of you in this room would even step foot in.
Ms. Brame, you're so right. And they're changing the subject. They're doing their best to change the subject here and obscure the facts because the facts are difficult for them to face. The objective fact is that Manhattan has instituted pro-crime, anti-victim policies that have resulted in an increase in violent crime and created this dangerous situation in the community. And in one America's once great cities that was the symbol of freedom and opportunity and liberty. According to the NYPD data, New York City saw a 23% surge in major crimes in 1 year since Alvin Bragg took over. That is the fact. We have a violent crime epidemic here, and everybody in America knows it because we see the videos played out on our television, local news, every single night of what's going on here.